I've recommended using an ECG chest strap as the most accurate heart rate tracking available for a long time, and I really think this is true. But does it matter which one you use? I've been wanting to make this video for a long time, but I always ran into testing issues. So now I just decided to make it, even though the video isn't exactly perfect. To test the performance of different ECG chest straps, I've been using 2 chest straps at the same time for months now. Always a Polar H10 combined with 2 of my favorite other ECG chest straps. Either the Garmin HRM Pro Plus or the Wahoo tracker. All 3 of these chest straps have different advantages and downsides, and today I want to share the results and show you why I think all of them are great, but to also help you decide which ECG chest strap to get. So let's get to it. By the way, for those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. And right here you can see an overview of the results for indoor cycling, where we compare the Polar H10 ECG chest strap against the Wahoo tracker ECG chest strap. And luckily we see an almost perfect agreement. There are some small moments where they didn't detect the exact same heart rate, but it's very minimal, and the correlation is also almost perfect at 1.00. So for indoor cycling, this just looks really good. Now the way we're gonna test these chest straps is by looking at the consistency between the 2 I was wearing at the same time. We will always consider the Polar H10 more or less as the gold standard here, and that's because in different scientific studies this has been shown to be super reliable. It won't be 100% perfect, but nothing is, so this is somewhat random to consider this the gold standard. But as you will see, I do think this makes sense in the end. What we hope to see is really good agreement between the 2 different chest straps I'm wearing, which you would only expect to be the case if both of them are reliable. Now the main problem I've been running into with this analysis has been small time shifts. I've always had the second chest strap connected to a Garmin device, which for some reason wasn't always perfectly syncing with the internet, so timestamps would shift a little bit, and this really influences the results. Just to show you what a time shift example looks like, it looks like this right here. And this right here is just one example of a time shifted heart rate recording. So this is the Garmin heart rate monitor against the Polar H10 ECG chest strap. And generally the time seems to have shifted by maybe a minute or so, but this just makes the comparison impossible. In the end, for each of the 2 extra chest straps I was testing, so the Garmin HRM Pro Plus and the Wahoo tracker, I opted to select 1 month where I had the least shifts for each exercise and to exclude clear cases of time shifts. Yes, I will try to fix this in my code at some point where it tries to find the best shift. However, for now I didn't have the time, but let's take a look at those results. But as I said, I opted to select those rides where I didn't see a clear time shift, like this one right here for the Wahoo tracker heart rate monitor compared to the Polar H10, and basically they overlap perfectly, so perfect in fact that you can almost not see the values according to the Polar H10. Only in the lower heart rate range sometimes is there maybe a 3 BPM difference or so, but this is basically perfect agreement. We see the same thing for this session, only in the lower heart rate range, very minor differences. Also right here, perfect agreement, the same for this session, and also right here. And this can also have to do with the way they calculate your heart rate, which might just be slightly differently defined, like the time span that they take. But overall, this is basically perfect. I had nothing to complain about. I'm really happy with these results. We can actually compare these results to that of many wrist-worn heart rate monitors. And then we get this result right here. And surprisingly, but also unsurprisingly to me, the Wahoo tracker heart rate monitor isn't the exact absolute top performer, because some wrist-based heart rate monitors are also basically perfect already. So this actually helps us define what is sort of the noise range in terms of how good a device can be. So we have the Wahoo tracker heart rate monitor marked in red right here. And if we zoom into just the best performing devices, so these are all good enough, all of them have a correlation above 0.98. So they're doing really well. We can see that likely sort of the noise in terms of how good a heart rate monitor can be is around 0.997 or so. This is still an area where I would say you cannot say that, for instance, the Amazfit Helio strap on the biceps is worse than the Apple Watch Series 8. All of them are roughly doing the same. Because again, if we zoom out, they're super close to each other. So this actually helps to define sort of a noise range. But let's now take a look at the Garmin heart rate monitor, because there the results just seem to be ever so slightly worse. And here we have the results according to the Garmin HRM Pro Plus on the left axis and the reference Polar H10, which we might not actually call a reference in this case, but the Polar H10 along the horizontal axis. Again, very good agreement, but not absolutely perfect. Here in the lower heart rate range, there's sometimes some disagreement where the Garmin detects a slightly higher heart rate. Correlation is still very close to 1 at 0.99, but we do see a bit more deviation here. And here I should say I connected both the Garmin and the Wahoo device always to the same Garmin devices that measure the heart rate. So sort of the algorithm that processes the heart rate signal should be the same for both of those tests that I did. So I either use my Garmin cycling computer, a Garmin watch, so it can be the Phoenix 7 Pro, the Epix 2 Pro, or the Forerunner 970. These are the ones that I connect these heart rate monitors to, and the processing should be the same. So let's take a look at some of the individual sessions to see what's going on here. So here we have one of those spinning sessions, again with the reference or sort of reference Polar H10 in blue-green and the Garmin HRM Pro Plus in red. And here I would say the agreement is more or less perfect, though in the lower heart rate range, similar to what we saw for the Wahoo tracker, there's a little bit more deviation, but still almost perfect. Also, this session almost perfect, but here we can see that there's a small deviation in the lower heart rate range. Also right here, sometimes when my heart rate is decreasing, for a moment, especially in the beginning, the Garmin heart rate monitor picks up on an increase in my heart rate for just a little bit. Overall though, more or less we get the same results, but there's often here in this first interval some weird thing going on where the heart rate monitor according to Garmin struggles a little bit more. Also right here, this first interval, the full dip wasn't detected. Also right here we see it's going down and then for a moment it stays steady and then it drops again. Also right here for the second interval we have a small deviation. And right here for a while it stopped detecting my heart rate, so I might have lost signal for a bit. Overall nothing major. Just when I have a really quick drop in my heart rate, every once in a while, it somehow detects a steady heart rate instead of the actual drop that I likely had. And the reason I think here the Garmin is likely wrong is because we never saw any of these issues with the Wahoo tracker heart rate monitor. So given that the Wahoo tracker and the Polar H10 are almost always perfectly consistent, and the Garmin HRM Pro Plus just shows these very minor issues, I do think these first two are just ever so slightly better, though any of them would be good enough for me. This also means that if we compare it to the competition, the Garmin HRM Pro Plus isn't absolutely perfect, and we are making the assumption here that because the Polar H10 and the Wahoo tracker are more consistent with each other than the Garmin HRM Pro Plus, that these two must be correct. This is not 100% certainty, but also because the patterns look a bit weird, I do think this is the most likely explanation. But let's now make things more difficult and let's take a look at the results for running. Now, before getting to the running results, running this channel, as always pun intended, next to my full-time job as a scientist is neither easy or cheap. I buy most of these devices myself. Last month I had to buy, for instance, 2 pairs of AirPods, an Apple Watch Ultra 3, an Apple Watch Series 11, an Apple Watch SE, some camera gear and a lot more. And of course I also have to pay my editor Alex for these videos that he edits. Now, if you want to support, the easiest way of doing that is by using one of my affiliate links in the description below, many of which support you at the same time by giving you the best discount possible. Or if you want to continuously support the channel without it costing you any extra, if you could bookmark my general Amazon affiliate link, so click it once and then press Command or Control D and then use that before making your normal Amazon purchases, that supports the channel and it doesn't cost you any extra. Also, since you might be into running, the best app for custom running plans in my opinion is the Runner app, which I use for my running plans and also for live guidance during my runs. And you can get a 2-week free trial with my affiliate link up here or down here. But let's get back to the running testing. And again, let's start with the Wahoo tracker heart rate monitor. And we actually have the best agreement I've ever seen between any two devices. So all points are extremely close to the blue line. The correlation is now again 1.00 rounded. So let's take a look at a few of those example runs. So I did like 12 or so in total. And let's then compare this to the competition, because here I cannot imagine that the Wahoo tracker is not the best agreeing device. So here for this first run, we have almost perfect agreement. Second run, almost perfect. Third run, the same. Fourth run. Basically for all of the runs, there's no significant difference between the Wahoo and the Polar H10. And I actually really like the Wahoo heart rate monitor because it has a built-in battery. Unlike the Polar H10, I've just charged it and I've never needed to replace the internal battery. Here we see one moment where the heart rate monitor likely had a false peak, but this was just 1 or 2 measurements. Otherwise, basically perfect agreement between the two. And if we compare this to the competition, we can indeed see that the Wahoo tracker heart rate monitor has the best agreement out of any device I've ever tested. So we can see that even better if we zoom in. So it's really the best performer. And again, here we can sort of calibrate as to what is the best performance you can ever get, because now we're comparing 2 brands of heart rate monitors connected to 2 different software platforms. So I've connected the Wahoo heart rate monitor to Garmin, the Polar H10 to Polar. And this is basically the best we can ever expect of any device we test. So overall, very solid performance. But let's now again look at the performance of the Garmin heart rate monitor. And also for Garmin, we have almost perfect agreement, so really good result. But some few moments where in this case the Polar H10 detected a slightly higher heart rate. Still, this looks very good. This would definitely be good enough. So I recommend any of these chest straps as being good enough. But let's take a look at those runs to see if we can explain these small deviations. So here we have the first example run, which is basically perfect near the end. In the beginning, there was a bit of deviation, so a delay in picking up on a change and a different peak right here. What could also have happened here, and this was an issue I sometimes had with running, is that the device didn't immediately connect to my Garmin watch. Usually I try to wait for it to happen, but sometimes I don't see that it hasn't connected yet and I just start running. And I would actually hold the device in my hand, so it might have tried to measure my heart rate in my hand here in the beginning. And that's why there was a bit of deviation. This run was basically perfect with a small delay right here. This run also basically perfect. Here also basically perfect agreement after it locked onto the heart rate signal. Here again we have some deviation in the beginning but not near the end, which could again be due to the same issue where I had the device in my hand, started measuring my heart rate inside my hand, and then it connected to the external heart rate monitor. Also here, only in the beginning a tiny bit of deviation, and those were all the runs that I included in this analysis. So overall again, whichever heart rate strap I used out of the 3 wouldn't have influenced my trainings in any way. I would say all of them are good enough. We can again put this into the context of many of the other devices, which is right here. So you can see that those small differences did add up to it being not quite as good in agreement with the Polar H10 as we saw for the Wahoo tracker heart rate monitor on top right here. Still, any of them would be good enough. I would be curious if I can somehow confirm that this was actually the issue, that in the beginning it wasn't connected to the chest strap yet. I cannot see it in any of the data because it shows up in the app as being connected to it, but it doesn't mean that it was always connected to it. So that's a bit hard to find out right now. That is also an issue in a way of the device if it needs that long to connect. Overall though, pretty solid performance. But let's now take a look at the hardest exercise in many cases, or maybe it's actually the second hardest exercise, biking outside. And here we have those results. The correlations are still amazing, especially in the higher heart rate range. In the lower heart rate range, the Wahoo tracker heart rate monitor and the Polar H10 sometimes have a few BPM difference. Overall, still really good result, though the correlation is just a tiny bit lower now at 0.99. But let's again look at the individual sessions. So for this first bike ride right here, I would say almost perfect agreement. Also right here, nothing major in terms of differences. Same here, here. Though here we had maybe a tiny difference in dip between the two, but basically the same. Also here. I mean, there's just no major differences between the two. They're almost detecting the same heart rate. So the Wahoo heart rate tracker and the Polar H10 basically perform the same, and I'm really happy with all these results. I did a total of maybe 40 bike rides or so, 30 maybe, and all of them give this kind of performance. So no matter if you use the Polar H10 or the Wahoo, you get the same result. We can also see that if we compare its performance to that of many other devices out there, it's again the top performer. This makes sense, of course, because they use the same kind of reference technology. but I just wanted to make sure that this was the case. So if we zoom into just the better performing devices, the Wahoo tracker monitor is really the best one out there. It's actually super close to 0.995, so it was almost a rounded correlation of 1.00. But you can really see again, here we have sort of the edge of maximum performance we can expect from any device out there. But let's also take a look at how the Garmin performed. And here we have that comparison with the Polar H10 here along the horizontal and the Garmin along the vertical axis. And there's generally a very good agreement, though not absolutely perfect. And here I think this might indicate that the way that the Garmin Pro Plus calculates heart rate is slightly different from the Polar H10. So you can imagine that your current heart rate can be calculated as just the distance between the heartbeats, and you get your heart rate out of that. So you just say that's like the continuous distance, so that's your current heart rate. Or you take the last 3 seconds and you calculate the average heart rate of that, or the last 5 seconds, or whatever. You can think of different ways of doing this. And this kind of systematic deviation could be an indication of that. So it's not like one is always lower or higher. There's about the same amount of points above or below the blue line. So let's take a look at those individual bike sessions. So here we have the first example bike ride, and it mostly looks very similar for the Polar H10 and the Garmin HRM Pro Plus. Only in the lower heart rate ranges there are tiny deviation, but here I couldn't say which one was better. Also right here, it seems to be mostly in those quick dips in heart rate that the Garmin doesn't fully detect them. And I do think the Garmin might be wrong here because it just detects a straight line in those moments, whereas the Polar detects a deeper dip, and we saw something similar with the heart rate monitor from Wahoo. Here again, it looks almost perfect. Here again, those dips just aren't fully detected, otherwise almost perfect. I mean, either one would still be good enough if we go through them. Just some of those really quick dips is just something that Garmin refuses to detect sometimes. Not sure what's going on there. Also looking very solid right here. It's just those small dips near the end. So I don't have much to complain about overall. I think Garmin did quite well still. And all the deviations that we saw were non-consequential to how I do my training. Still, I would personally slightly prefer the Polar H10 and the Wahoo, but that's again very personal. We can also put this into the perspective of many other devices again. We can again see that the Garmin HRM Pro Plus, in terms of agreement with the Polar H10, assuming the Polar H10 is correct, which again we can argue about, but given that the Wahoo and the Polar are similar, I think it's somewhat likely. It's still not the absolute best, so the Garmin HRM Pro Plus is not the absolute best, but it's definitely good enough. And no matter which of these three you get good heart rate tracking. Now to close off, let's take a look at one of the most important reasons I wear a heart rate strap, and that's for weightlifting, because there's no other way to get reliable heart rate tracking during weightlifting, at least on my body, besides wearing an ECG chest strap, so either Polar H10 or one of the other ones we looked at here. But let's see how good that agreement is. And here we have the results for Wahoo. Again, the Polar H10 along the horizontal and the Wahoo heart rate monitor along the vertical axis. And we have very good agreement, though there's a slightly bigger deviation now. Still nothing to complain about. And part of the reason it also looks like a slightly bigger deviation than the other ones is because we're looking at a slightly narrower heart rate range. So before, my heart rate might go up to 160, 170. So then the axes were also much longer. So now we also see more of the deviations. Still overall 0.99 is really good, but let's see where there's actually these small differences. And here we have the first weightlifting session I wanted to show you with, again, the Polar H10 in blue-green, the Wahoo heart rate monitor in red. Basically perfect agreement, and this small difference I think actually the Polar lost signal for a little bit, which is why it had a straight line. So here I think the Wahoo did better. Also here almost perfect agreement, basically no complaints here. Also right here, all peaks are detected by both devices. Same here. I would even say that potentially the Wahoo did a little bit better on this peak right here. Also right here, nothing to complain about. Really good here as well. And also right here, basically perfect agreement. So even though the correlation was a bit lower, that's also because our heart rate range was a bit narrower, because my heart rate just doesn't get as high as it does for cardio. And we can again compare this to the competition, and we can see it's not the absolute best correlating one, but that's also because it doesn't take into account dropouts. So Apple devices often have dropouts, so the moment it has a bad signal, it just filters that out. So it's just left with the best data it has, which will give a higher correlation, but will leave you with less data. So if we zoom into just the best performing devices, those with a correlation of 0.9 or higher, We can see the Wahoo heart rate monitor is not the absolute best correlating one, but basically the same as all these Apple devices here. And it doesn't have dropouts. So again, this sort of calibrates the maximum correlation we can expect, but this doesn't take into account dropouts. So for this, any chest strap is definitely better. And I can recommend both the Polar and the Wahoo. And to close off, let's see how the Garmin did. And here we have that correlation of the Polar H10 with the Garmin HRM Pro Plus. This is again not perfect and even deviating quite a bit more than what we saw for the Wahoo tracker and the Polar H10. Again, this is likely good enough, but I am curious to see what the individual sessions look like because the correlation is just 0.96, still very good, but I am curious. And here we have the first training session, which mostly looks similar between the Garmin and the Polar. Only right here, there are two peaks that were not the same. And maybe the Garmin even did better here, detecting slightly higher peaks. That's hard to say. And there was one moment of dropout. Otherwise, really good agreement. Also here, I would say almost perfect agreement. Though the Garmin again had a delay in picking up that decrease in heart rate. Here also almost perfect agreement. And again, it appears that here Garmin sometimes has delays in picking up on decreases in heart rate. At least if we trust the Polar, so that happens right here, 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 and also actually quite clearly here. This session right here actually has almost perfect agreement, one delay right here. Also this looks really good. Here, almost perfect agreement. And here the Garmin goes up faster than the Polar. I don't know if the Garmin was better here or if here they actually calculate heart rate differently, which might also be a partial reason for these delays and drops in heart rate, not too sure. And again, almost perfect agreement here. We're really nitpicking here and trying to decipher why there are some small differences. Nobody would structure their trainings differently based on any of these chest straps. I think they're all doing very well. But again, let's compare this correlation to that of many other devices. So the Garmin is a bit lower here than the Wahoo. Let's actually zoom in a bit. So here we have the Garmin and we had the Wahoo right here. So again, they're super close. I think both of them are definitely good enough. You will get good enough heart rate tracking. It just depends on what your preference is because they do have different features, and I'll get to that now. So generally, no matter which chest strap you use, you get really good heart rate tracking performance. We did see some differences between the chest straps, and for some reason the Wahoo tracker seems to be closer to the Polar H10 than the Garmin HRM Pro Plus. Now this makes me think that likely because two are very similar and one is different, that these two that are similar are slightly better, though it's hard to say. And there are also some limitations to my testing. Of course, I just tested it on me, which is not a perfect test. I would like to test it on more people. Second, the other chest strap that I tested was always below the Polar H10, so it was in a slightly imperfect position. You would rather have all of them in the same position, but that's just impossible. I don't think it matters much, but that's just something to take into account. We did see again though that the Wahoo chest strap was closer to the Polar H10 than the Garmin, but all of them would be good enough for me. I don't think anything about my trainings would change no matter which one of these I would use. So which one of these should you get? Well, it really depends on how and why you want to use it. All of them are probably good enough at heart rate tracking and they all have different strengths. So let's start with the Polar H10. This is the proven workhorse of the bunch. It's relatively old, but proven in many scientific studies, and it will just work. It doesn't have a lot of fancy stuff. You can connect multiple devices to it. It has both N+ and Bluetooth. So it's just a proven workhorse with nothing much extra, but it will just work. So if you just want something that works, I would get that one. Then the Wahoo. This has actually become my favorite device because it has an internal battery. Unlike most other heart rate monitors, it doesn't use this kind of button battery like the same one you put in a normal old-fashioned watch, but it has an internal battery that you charge, and I actually quite like that. I don't have problems charging devices, and I just like knowing that I don't have to buy batteries every 3 to 6 months or so. To me, this makes life just a little bit easier. So I think that internal battery is just a great feature of the Wahoo Tracker heart rate monitor. But what about the Garmin? Who should get that? Well, this particular Garmin isn't for sale anymore, but I think any high-end Garmin heart rate monitor will have a few features in common. And the most important is that it easily integrates within the Garmin ecosystem, and it usually measures a few extra parameters, especially for running, that these other devices won't measure if you connect them to your Garmin watch, unless that Garmin watch already has it built in. There's a few running parameters that I really like and that seem really accurate, and that would be the reason I would use a Garmin chest strap for running. So all of them have their advantages, all of them have their disadvantages, but all of them will likely work. In short, no matter which chest strap you get, as long as you get it from a reputable brand, will likely do good enough. It's just in general the most reliable way of measuring your heart rate under almost any conditions. Maybe in extreme cold you will have some issues, or if you do something where there's a lot of pressure on your body, maybe you do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or some other combat sport. In those cases you might have problems, but otherwise it's just the most reliable heart rate tracking out there. Again, if you want to support the channel and you want to support your own finances at the same time, use one of my affiliate links in the description below and you will likely get the best discount possible. Whether it be the Amazfit Helio strap, an ECG chest strap, an Apple Watch, an H-Sleep pod, a Whoop strap, or maybe an Oura ring, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter. Even something as small as a rubber ducky or toilet paper, whatever you want to get. You can also become a YouTube member, which is like Patreon on YouTube, and it gives you early access to some of my videos, like this one for instance. Now, given that you watched this video, I think you will like this video on the Whoop strap or this video on the H-Sleep pod.